Forebase is part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. All right. So we'll leave it nameless, but one of us showed up at the last second. Perfect. We were just talking about Inbox Zero, and I gave up many years ago, but then I got back on the wagon because Google came out with this great inbox product that allowed me to like get really good at that concept, and then they killed the product, and I've since fallen back off the wagon, and my inbox is a disaster.
It happens.
Alberto and James say they're at 0. Are you at 0 right now, guys? Both of you?
I'll confirm in a moment. Hold on. I'm actually at 3. Damn. No.
I'm at 17, but those are actionable. So they're like, it's stuff that I have to work through, or it's stuff that I've snoozed. So I'm at 17 now.
How you doing, Raffi? We don't have any audio from you. He missed the mic check.
Let's try it that way.
Yeah, there it is.
So I actually have an admin that clears mine out every day.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Yeah. So other than anything that I flagged that's active, but I'm trying to work on moving those to other things so I don't have anything.
Yeah.
So a little by
I've
little.
been thinking about that. About just saying, you know what? Someone might be better at this than I am.
Yep.
Maybe you just need to have maybe you just need to have like a par on your inbox. Like your par could be like 1,000, or handicap 1,000. You know, you're like, I only have one.
Well, what I've done over the last year is, I've actually gotten really structured in my business operation of taking all the things that are actually urgent and important out of the inbox and putting them in other business inboxes, of which we have a handful of business inboxes for different things. Just like you MSPs have all been good at for years, but as a software vendor, things aren't as structured. They don't have PSAs for software vendors. We just have like dumb enterprise ticketing systems that aren't, they're not as flexible, right? Unless you really go deep in ServiceNow land or something. But so we came here just to do retrospective in 2024. Alberto missed the pre-call, but we caught him up. We don't have a lecture today, so I want to jump in, but before we do that, let's just tell everyone who we got here, because we didn't even do a show intro. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the MSP Cyber Roundtable. We've got Raffi from Triada Networks, James Markley from Virtumarc. We got Alberto from RIZQ, and we've got Rob from First Tracks Technology. And you guys are all in what I would say the camp of service providers that have really figured out how to make money off of your customers' cybersecurity care, their due care, right? Their due care is translating into your due diligence. You're all doing a pretty effective job at monetizing, which I didn't even think about when we sent the invites out, but it makes sense that you guys were the ones that said, yeah, I want to talk about this year. So maybe if we could, before we jump into topic of the day, I would love if you guys could categorize for yourself, or for the public rather, each take a turn and just say like, hi, this is me and this is how I make money from cyber, because that would be great. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. Hi, I'm James Markley. I'm the CEO of Virtumarc. One of the things that we really put a focus on over here is being fully integrated, almost vertically integrated into our clients' portfolio. So the greatest compliment for us is hearing clients that tell us that we're not a vendor, we're like a real business partner, like we're like in there in the trenches with them. And I think that that's where the IT world has evolved. You have to be in the trenches with your clients. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to sit down with them and take phone calls at all hours of the night to work through problems with them and help give them ideas and advice. And that's what we really do that's different. I mean, there's a lot of people that like to work MSP as a 9 to 5, or they say, hey, you know what? My SLA says I don't answer the phone after 7 o'clock at night. SLAs don't matter when you're talking about owners or executives. It really doesn't. They appreciate that special touch. And just like you would as an owner or executive, you appreciate having accessibility to your vendors. They want to have accessibility to you. So.
Yep.
All right.
I'll take second bet. I'll echo James like completely. That's our ethos at Risk is 100% the same, and I'll add to that I think a big key to the success of doing this job well, depending on the type of customer. Of course, when we attend small businesses, obviously small businesses stick to one player, and you go back to them 24/7, and nobody else is in the thing. But when you're expanding those small businesses, how you interact with your peers and competitors in your space and collaborate, I think is a big part of how MSPs should be, thinking forward towards expanding their service deliverability.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alberto. One thing that you brought up that kind of resonated well is we're now on. We hadn't done traditionally co-managed deals, and we're now on the third one where they're bringing us in because there's some pain point either that the MSP is not solving, or that they're looking for some additional expertise that the MSP doesn't have. And part of that is that white glove treatment that James mentioned. Your 2-hour SLA sucks at 1 hour and 59 minutes. That's a pissed off customer at that point. One of the things why we never really dealt with SLAs other than internal tracking purposes only. Otherwise you're not helping anybody. The vertical integration thing is an interesting part. So where we work with financial services clients, we're with them when they're going on deals. Like when they're getting due diligence done on an investment, an investor is coming in or the SEC is coming in. We're sitting at the table on their side as part of their team. And I think that makes the world of difference.
Rob, you're up, man. I'm noticing a trend, but
yeah, Raffi, I'm with you. I mean, that joint ownership you just talked about describes our journey. We've had a small ego when it came to cyber. Cyber was actually very humbling for us, and we found ourselves on the same side of the table as our customer. And we met people like Fort Mesa and others, but where we may have walked into a room with a different posture on a certain other technology, with cyber we were learning too. Quickly evolving and so forth, and that joint ownership has served our company well. So that's why we're here, and it's been successful.
Well, I just want to. I think our audience heard you all, but it was interesting this alignment here. I would classify you all as being in the top quarter of our channel from the perspective of best practice in delivering cybersecurity needs to your end clients. But when I hear you guys talk about it, right, what I'm hearing is, well, it's because it's in alignment with what our customers need. We're taking care of their needs. We're listening to what they need. We're there helping them operate. We're helping them. Raffi, you put like a really, really fine point on it. We are literally helping them compete, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if you guys have correlated that, like what you do, but now you've got 3 other peers that are saying the same thing about, well, we do cyber because, right? Not we do cyber because we want to be secure or safe, right?
Well,
I
you
think-
do
it's
it
funny because when we started out, sorry, I didn't mean to step on
Oh,
you.
no, go ahead, Raffi. You're good.
All right, go ahead.
When we first started out, you know, I came out of corporate IT, larger investment firm. Cyber was kind of new. I had all these emerging technology connections, so I wanted to do cyber because we felt like we needed to. And it wasn't until kind of the ecosystem and the market caught up to us that we actually had the language of describing it in a more appropriate business way, especially around dealing with risk. And when we were talking to business owners about risk mitigation, how this helps you compete, I think it makes the conversation, one, more interesting, and two, you don't have to convince them the same way that you would otherwise to buy a widget.
Yep.
Well, I think the one thing that, going back to what you were saying, Matt, about cyber and really not necessarily positioning yourself even as a cyber firm is it's just the right thing to do, right? Like, I mean, if we aren't doing it in our own organization to help take care of our clients downrange, then how can we expect them to do it? And inherently, if we're all in a position, like you mentioned, the alignment of us trying to vertically integrate with our clients, of us trying to be there and help them win business, us trying to help them build their business, like we need to exemplify that on our own side, whether that's the way we grow our businesses or the way that we secure them, so that way we can show that to our client base that, hey, there is a way to do this. And, you know, inherently that just means that you're going to try and be more secure as an organization. You're going to try and focus on cybersecurity. You're going to put those kinds of solutions in front of your client.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. But I you know, I appreciate Raffi you saying the thing we all know, which is it's for us like tech geeks that have like been in this industry for a while, right? It's sort of fun, right? It's like an interesting, like from an intellectual perspective, an interesting part of our job, right? Is trying to figure out how to reduce risk, right? So the fact that it's now in alignment with what the industry needs
Right.
is sort of like this bonus, right?
Yeah.
So we had 3 topics that we brought up during a pre-call. So I'm going to just throw up the first one here. EDR now with more service, which the background here is, you know, we had anti-malware solutions, antivirus solutions a number of years ago, which moved towards things that were a little more behavioral, a little more live, connected to the cloud. As security standards emerged, it was decided that, hey, these anti-malware suites should maybe be looking at any type of anomaly or different types of anomalies, indicators of compromise. So this created this new software category, right? EDR. We call it other things too, XDR, MDR, depending on how it's productized and what it's packaged with, right? But big thing has happened over the last, I think, I don't know if we drew an exact timeline on this, and I would love to hear your opinions, guys. But I think it's 18 months where we've seen the focus on EDR solutions. It's no longer a software category. It's now a software plus service category, right? With this understanding that what the reason people choose an EDR suite has changed a little bit because we're not looking at software capability. We're looking at the overall solution, including the team operating the anomaly detection and how predictable they are and how much we trust them, right? But then there's the service inside the service provider, right? As the recipient of these anomalies, right? You've got like your part to play. And if you don't play your part, like it may as well not be a detection, right? So it's sort of changed the nature of EDR as a tool, as a segment, as like a spend category. And I'm curious if you guys should we talk about our favorite vendors or who we hate? Let's not talk about who we hate, actually. Let's talk about. I can't talk about who I hate. Maybe you guys can, but we could talk about maybe who we think's doing something pretty neat right now. Does anyone want to?
I know when we talked last time, Matt, and we were talking with James, the R part of this EDR part, the responses, we as MSPs are starting to orchestrate what the vendor is now saying they'll do. And one minute we feel like, wow, it really supplements our offering because there's a SOC somewhere looking at alerts, and you know, people like Alberto and I can sleep in maybe a little bit while they're responding. And then we realize that we have to orchestrate even their response because they might just say, well, it's just weird, anomalous, RDP traffic, and that's ultimately the business app being delivered, and we just can't turn it off, right? So there's a lot in between there, and the R part has really presented a challenge to us as MSPs. It's also created a direct connective tissue to the customer, where all of a sudden maybe a service that we used to provide and really invest in might be implied by the solution. I'm not saying it's fully delivered, and that changes the sales cycle a little bit. But those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, 'cause that's actually, I think we're all in the same space, right? We've all picked our vendors. We all have our preferred vendors. We don't have to talk about who we hate and who we love. I think it's pretty obvious who I'm on board with. But the R part is definitely, something that will differentiate MSSPs as ourselves, and we have to always keep in front of mind is you may have the best vendor, the best selection, but they don't take on all the risk, all the contracts that you have with the vendors get to a certain point. It's up to us as MSSPs to be that front line. We're actually the faces that the customer is looking at to be responsible. They're not looking at Sophos. They're not looking at Barracuda. They're not looking at Huntress. They're not looking at all these other things. They're the people you're bringing in and you're recommending to do a certain part of the job. I'm personally trying to build out my team into where I will eventually be able to say, I do have somebody 24/7 at risk at night, ready to talk to the Barracuda guys and exchange information with the customer back and forth, because we are the ones that are actually knowing how the customer is configured, what their ins and outs are, what their switches look like, what their servers look like, who's in accounting, who's in operations, etc. We develop that relationship. We really just need to look at our vendors not as just what we're reselling and dumping on the customer, but how we become very efficient in doing our job, and the vendors that we trust, to do that well for us. And that's I believe the role that MSSP should 100% keep front of mind when they're dealing with vendor selection.
Yeah, I'll only add that when it's interesting you talked about response, in the sense that that's where we struggle with, from our evolution of going through this tool set. When we started looking at let's call it advanced endpoint tools a few years back, there really wasn't a lot available in the MSP space. It was mostly enterprise. You had CrowdStrikes, etc., even SentinelOne. They didn't have an MSP program. So we ended up having to buy an enterprise tool and implement it, thinking that this tool is going to solve this advanced problem, and not realizing the amount of the service that it actually needed and management it actually needed. And it wasn't until we learned about it along the way during that process that I was like, okay, we need to have the service end of this EDR. And now we're seeing the same thing with these, I don't know, call it cloud detection and response products as well, where that's actually made it a bigger emphasis, because we're detecting a client logging in from France, but they're just visiting France, but they're logging in from Vietnam. Maybe they're visiting Vietnam, maybe they're not, maybe it's nefarious. And so we need to have that intimate knowledge of the customer. The back-end company is not going to have that information, so it becomes a collaborative thing. In CompTIA, we talk about the risk responsibility matrix, right? Where who is responsible for what and when, and being clear about that, and defining the boundaries of each person's or each group's services. What's the client responsible for? What's the MSP responsible for? What's the vendor responsible for? And I think that shifts depending on the capability of the vendor and the capability of the MSP. And one thing that we see is that sometimes you can compensate for let's say, poorer EDR product with better people than you can with, let's say, a stellar product with less people. So you kind of have to move that lever sometimes a little bit.
Anything you want to offer up, James? I know it's really like this is an evolving space from the perspective of what customers expect, right? Not necessarily what the right thing to do is, but what they expect, which has an impact to how we, you know, we may have known this is the right thing to do 4 or 5 years ago, but as you noted, Raffi, the products didn't exist, and if the customer doesn't expect it, you can't offer it as a service. They won't pay for it, right? So,
I
what are you
think
seeing?
that one of the things is and Rafi hit it on the head. Riz talked about it a little bit. Rob was talking about it too. It's the response side of things, right? And we're very quick in the IT industry to push EDR to a customer and talk about EDR and say this is something that you need to have, right? But having that response and also the analytical skill inside of your staff to be able to look at that is something critical, because without that, EDR is absolutely pointless, right? Like if you have nobody that's looking at this stuff and nobody's actually evaluating it, why are you selling EDR to your clients, right? Like sell them an advanced endpoint security product or sell them like a managed threat detection or a managed threat response type of product, and then pull yourself out of the mix of the EDR side. And what I see is maybe this evolution, like, Rafi kind of indicated a little bit, but like this evolution where like some of the MTR type functionality that used to exist at MTR level only or managed detection and response levels only, right, has started to go down and say, hey, wait, we can do some log analysis on EDR for you, but it's going to cost you X amount per endpoint, right? But still, I think that's the other part. Like, it's just the analysis, the detection, the actual remediation still is relying on the MSP to do it. And they're just saying, hey, we want to bring this to your attention. So, I mean, in my world, the way I look at it is like I need to have clients in one of two camps. They either need to be in a fully managed SOC solution where there's actually a response there with authorization to engage, right? Or they need to be in a advanced endpoint security type of solution where we're monitoring it and then we kind of do it, the automated tools pick it up and then we do our part. But that in-between part of EDR, I feel like without adding on those ancillary services in any MSP, unless you start talking about the bigger one, like the larger ones, I don't want to say it's a money waste, but it's a false sense of security. Because it's like saying, hey, you know what, like unless you're talking about an MSSP that has maybe, 35, 40, 50 employees, like, to have an EDR and to say, well, we have the staff to look at it, unless they're specifically focusing on cyber, like they're not able to. There's so many different products out there that they're not focused on that one thing they need to be focused on, which is the EDR reporting coming back.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have a quick poll before we move on topics here. So this thing that's been happening in the industry where we actually have to draw a box around the SLA of response, right? Rather than just saying we have the response capability, but actually define the service and do the thing on a regular basis, right? It's sort of new because for a lot of years it was, oh yeah, we've got a binder in the back, right? And it was dusty and who knows what was in it, right? But this has been in security theory, right? This is in the basics of security theory is you need to be doing this, and the industry has caught up, and you guys are all best practice operators, and you're doing the thing. I want to throw another ball at you, which is one of the things that's coming up in the industry, which is the same security concepts, right? That sort of drew a box around SLAs. This is because like there's massive amounts of information and telemetry we could gather from systems to gauge problems, right? But if all we have are random alerts, right? Like we only randomly find the problems, right? Which is, it's okay if if there's nothing nefarious going along, because someone could just raise their hand and say, hey, something doesn't seem right, and then you could be like, oh yeah, let me write this thing and fix it, right? But when you've got an actual actor that you're racing, right? That time to respond is really important. So that's why we have these solutions in place. So here's what's next. What security theory says is none of you should be getting alarms directly to your inbox, because every bit of telemetry that you receive should be tuned for alert thresholds. So that, as in like everything runs through a NOC or a SOC, right? And every possible potential piece of telemetry or alert that you could receive, right, is going there, and everything has got a tuned threshold.
Yep.
How far away do each of you think you are from that, or do you think that we're just never going to get there as an industry? Because I know it's almost an impossible dream, I think. But
I guess I'm going to speak up here. So I'm very, very confident about the vendor selection that we've made. So, you know my backstory, Matt, but I'll offer it up for the public. So, I've been a partner with what used to be called Scout Cybersecurity, maybe, I don't know, 6-7 years. So, right, I was doing the cool thing before it was cool. And then Barracuda came in and scooped them up and made them this huge powerhouse. And they've gotten the telemetry portion of it to a point where I can really, as an MSSP, not sit back and forget about things, because that's not what we're talking about here. But what you just mentioned is what they have really swung very well at. So they don't fill the MSSP or the customer with a mass of alerts unless there's actually something that needs to be checked at, right? And they plug into enough points of the business currently with their capabilities where they look at everywhere where it's important to look at, they have the live wire sharking of the networks with their IDS sensors and their AI integrations with multiple brands of firewalls, right? They have strong integrations with all the major brands. They're very brand agnostic, and they plug into the M365, the Google apps, and the Amazon Web Services, and all of these things. And all that telemetry, billions and billions of data points are just going to them, and they're using their people and their integrations and their AI and all the detection mechanisms to really sift through this and kind of get to that point. And it feels like a panacea at this point, really, with at least with Barracuda XDR, and they've been recognized about that.
So you shift all of your notifications into that platform,
100%.
and so it's and the reason I'm bringing this up is when you have an EDR agent, right? It's picking up anomalies, right? But it's only the type of anomalies it knows how to look for, right? To really do what Alberto's talking about, or what I was talking about, you have to have a platform. It's not just a platform, right? It's a process to operate the platform where you say, well, I'm just going to throw random telemetry at this thing, right?
Mhm.
And it's gonna filter, and it's gonna change the way I respond, because other than a human raising their hand, right? The only way I'm gonna get a systems notification is through this process, right? And that includes all security anomalies, all alerts, right? So you feel like you're already living in that world.
Yeah.
Are you guys? How far along on that adoption road are you? The rest of you? I a little bit feel like it's an impossible dream, because there's always one more product that doesn't support that or something, or only sends it to the users, right? And doesn't allow you to do a third-party mailbox. But I guess you could do mail filters or something. But
So, I mean, I guess it depends on how far along I've upsold the customer, because obviously Barracuda XDR sells things by modules. So you either come in with all guns blazing and say, hey, you take the entire suite, or you don't take, or you just take this one thing. But you slowly gain their confidence and trust to get them to plug in all the modules. And once they're fully swept in, I mean, you even have the chance as an MSSP to offer them cyber liability insurance, like extensions or warranties, right? They call them warranties. So it's just a matter of how far you upsell the customer. They do a very good job of integrating new things, and when you're a strong partner like we are with them, I got direct lines to top brass. So I just go like, hey, this customer has this new thing, let's look at it. And they do the R&D, and they jump in, and they don't make promises right away, but they pay attention to what's trending. Of course, we don't fully entrust absolutely everything to them. We use other things that we plug in and we monitor with our RMM and things like that, which is the value add that we bring on top of the relationship. Is some additional things that we do as well. But it's a constant thing. I don't think you'll ever just get there. It's always, the bar is always moving, so you have to be always moving towards that bar constantly. If you're not doing that, then it's like doing a risk assessment once, like we do, and then not doing it for a year. 2 weeks later, that risk assessment doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
same thing.
Well, we had gone down the road, and we ended up basically blowing it up, because unlike Alberto, our selection didn't pan out as well as we were hoping.
This was the XDR or something?
Yeah, let's call it a unified security platform. for better lack of a better term. XDR was part of it. There were other parts of it, SIEM, SOC, etc. So we ended up blowing it up and finding out that if there may be, so right now we're in like this, I wouldn't say limbo, but we're like this mixed bag of some things are filtered, some things are direct, some things go through one SOC, something go through another SOC, and then we're in the working our way towards a place where there's a single body and team and solution that filters things before they reach us. Right now, we're doing it on a product by product basis, not holistically. So our first job was like, all right, let's reduce the noise down. Let's get that down first, and then we can work on doing the more horizontal integrations across. So we're not there yet, certainly, but that's a future that I'd like to see for sure.
So I think one of the things that's always going to be a challenge in the vendor space is, like you mentioned earlier, Matt, the idea that some vendors are going to want to do it one way, other ones are going to want to do it another way, right? You have some that even right now, they deal with webhooks. You have other ones that deal with email alerting. You have some that want to deal with, they only want to alert to, let's say, one email address versus multiple email addresses. And so I think in this space, what I think is most important for a lot of the MSP space to do is to figure out how can you organize all that data coming in, right? And then that gives you really an idea. And I've seen it different ways. I've seen people that say, okay, well, we're going to flood everything to an alerts email for our company, and we're just going to call it a day, and we're going to hope for the best, right? I know for us, we've done a lot around email filtering when it's coming in, and we're getting webhooks and everything else to tie them and correlate them to customer records, right? But then once you start getting those, you have to look at the data coming in and find out what is it you actually don't need to see. Because sometimes you're just seeing information for the sheer idea that it's great to see it, right? You're like, oh, cool, I'd love to see that. But it really doesn't matter. Like, I mean, in the grand scheme of delivery of services, it doesn't matter. The problem that you run into with any of these, and Raffi probably ran into this a little bit when he did the holistic, like, unified security approach to this, is like, you're always going to have a vendor who's going to say, okay, well, and we're a Sophos part. I'm going to use Sophos as an example, right? Sophos will say, okay, well, we're willing to feed alerts via webhook, but only to these two PSAs, right? And then they'll say, and then we'll do these other ones via email if you want email alerts. But then if I go to another vendor, we do Cloudflare, right? So we're a Cloudflare master MSP, and we can do ZTNA and SASE solutions with them and all that, right? Like, Cloudflare's platform does not allow me, unless I'm going to develop an API, to pull that webhook data in, right? Like, I don't have a native way to do that inside of their platform, which is okay. So I think that that's where, like, the MSPs are, I think we're 5 to 7 years out, because you're seeing MSPs that are coming out with, like, over the last few years even, they're coming out with solutions where they're saying, hey, look, I had this problem with this vendor, and I developed a solution to interface with this to pull this data down in a method that I could. And that's where you're starting to see that emergence of all these automation tools come from. And I think that that's where we're going to end up. 5 to 7 years down the road, you'll have these professionalized, fully automated solutions where you can go and say, okay, I need this, and here's the guy that I know plays with my vendors, right? But I don't think that we're there yet. I mean, unless you're like, in Riz's case, right? Like, he's got a holistic, like, approach to it where he says, okay, this is the vendor that I work with on that. It's like the Kaseya's, the Roll, the ConnectWise's, the Barracudas, right? They have a holistic ecosystem, and you're saying I'm taking the ecosystem. You can do it in the ecosystem.
Yeah, it depends on your tech alignment, right? Because in some cases, particularly if you're in fully managed world, right, you have the ability to align all the tech, right? If all your customers look the same and you've chosen all your vendors to align, right? But the real world is full of all sorts of situations.
And you gotta weigh it out. Like, I mean, in some cases, right, like, your customer base also dictates your stack a little bit. They're not telling you what to support and what not to support. But, if you talk about, like Raffi mentioned, he's working with banks and things like that, in securities, like, his tech stack's going to look different than, say, RIZQ's tech stack or Rob's tech stack. And that being the case, like, I know our tech stack, like, we handpicked everything we did with the idea that we needed to worry about compliance from the get-go, right? Like, that's a whole different tech stack than somebody who's building an MSP to scale ad nauseum in more of a commercial space that maybe they're not as worried about that kind of stuff. So it just depends,
So, unfortunately, I can't find the exact bit of research, but before we leave topics, I just want to bring something up for you guys to think about here, okay? And this should be feedback to your detection vendors since you guys are doing the response. Um, if you have more than 10% false positives, that is your noise rate, right? Like if at least 11% of the time, at least 10% of the time, right? More than 9% of the time when you go to investigate a detection, the detection is not useful, right? It's not actually indicative of an anomaly that you need to care about, right? Which is in tech world like sort of like this nebulous thing. Like, okay, like low hard disk space is that something that matters or doesn't matter? Well, sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't matter, right? So you need to tune these things in places where they make sense. And if it's more than 10% of the time, it doesn't matter. There's this psychological impact that's shown. Apparently, there's a exponential decrease in vigilance as you exceed 10% false positives. So, and that's the reason why we want to get to this. It's almost like where we started inbox zero, guys, right? You started inbox zero so that you can empty your brain and actually respond to stuff that matters, right? The same thing's true in that detection and response world. And we all need to get to like that inbox zero of detect respond, right? So that's the goal, and I hope you all get there soon. I don't know, Rob, you got your hand up or you just itching?
No, I was just going to add, Matt, that we may have a crazy approach to it, but if you said, what's the place that we dump this data to us, it's the PSA, and we have people looking at it. Because there's a user side. If a user gets phished, it may not be an alert, right? I mean, maybe Microsoft, if they click the link, will say malicious link after the fact, after delivery, and that's an alert. But a key input to us sometimes as end users, when 3 of them say, wow, we got this weird DocuSign email from somebody we don't do business with. That's an input that we like to still respond to and be aware of. So to us, the integration point that we dump alerts and other things to is our PSA, and our ticket queues mean the world to us. That's our cockpit dashboard.
And I think sometimes you also want to collect information that you may not need to respond to, but it then gives you information about an incident that occurred as well, right?
Yep.
So for us, that becomes very important because then we have to create some sort of timeline, narrative, whatever, of what actually occurred that we may not necessarily need of all the details in terms of an alert.
Yeah, as long as it's not distracting, right?
I mean,
Right.
a great example, Raffi, like you're mentioning about that, like this timeline, right? Like you lose communication with a site, UPS battery loses communication at the same time, server loses communication at the same time, right? It's generating umpteen alerts, one after the other, but at least it's telling you what happened because when you look at the holistic thing, you say, oh, well, they lost power, right? And so I know that like, Matt, what you were saying about the whole 9% or 10%, like we went through this iteration at the beginning of the year. We were getting like somewhere between the way that like our engineering team had looked at our RIM tool, we were getting something like, 50 or 60 alerts a day.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
how many mattered?
Right, and then when you start digging into them, you're like, okay, well that one's low disk space, which is funny because you mentioned that because I'm like, I don't really care if they have 10% low disk space. I care if it's 5, right? But I'm like, 10% low disk space on a 1 terabyte hard drive is 100 gig. Like, I'm like, why are we worried about the threshold being 100 gig, right? Like, maybe we can we like lower it to maybe say like less than 20 gigs available? We're worried about it because 20 gigs on a 1 terabyte hard drive is just as critical as 20 gigs on a 256 gig hard drive. But 10% on 256 is a lot more critical than 10% on a 1 terabyte, right? So you have to like really tune those alerts and like and say, well, what really matters? Like, high CPU utilization, does that really matter? Like, yeah, it represents like rapid encryption of files, right? But like, if it goes away and it's happening right when the user starts their computer up at the beginning of the day and they have a really, really old computer and you're running any kind of advanced endpoint security, guess what you're going to hit? That alert, right? So as you start to tune those out and you say cut back on the noise, you get to the ones that matter. I mean, we went from, let's say 60 or so alert tickets a day. Now I just looked at ours today while we were talking, we're at 13. And I'm like, but those are 13 actionable, like, power outages, review this file, things like that. And then people are actually able to take the time to look at them and evaluate them,
Yeah. And so I think that's an important thing to note is the actionable, right? And even actionable is difficult because actionable may trigger an action, and after you perform the action, you may say to yourself, well, was that a necessary action or is that not a necessary action? And that's a really important question, right? So you do need to ask yourself at the end of the action, did I need to do that? Or was there a way I could have handled this with automation this was actually a false positive? That's a really important question to keep asking yourself, right?
And I think, Matt, that's a very an important point to touch on there is what can we build a customer and how does the customer really feel value from the actions you're taking? Like at least we try to only build our customer when we actually solve the problem that needed to be solved. So, or I just do things really, really fast and build them, fractionable amounts within the rates for verifying certain alerts. Because you don't want a customer being built for like, oh, he checked my drive space, like James was talking about, and then you build them half an hour because it took me, half an hour to like rationalize this. And the customer's like, well, you didn't fix anything here.
Get honest about your actionability answers, right?
Exactly.
And try to get to the point where 9 out of 10 of those, not only were they actionable, but there was no way to deal with it any other way than with humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
All right, you guys ready to talk about the tech giants that are just like unavoidable these days? Because Apple's worth $4 trillion now, apparently, and like we used to laugh about them being in the like it was irrelevant in the IT space, but now we got Macs all over the place in customer organizations, right? Everyone's got an iPhone. So we've got all these big tech companies, and if we rewind 10 years, like it was like Microsoft mattered a lot and Google mattered a tiny little bit, right? And now we've got Amazon's unavoidable, right? Apple's unavoidable. We've got Facebook that's like Meta seems unavoidable just from the perspective of the AI is actually like in the hands of our customers' users, and they're sticking customer data in it, and like all of a sudden we have to worry about that now. What are the big giant moves this year, other than the fact that they keep getting bigger? Who's getting hit?
We'll find out in January when people come in with new toys, and then we see what new thing that they want to add, whether it's the Meta glasses or whatever. At one point it was the Amazon Echoes that were popping up on people's networks and what have you after they were released. Prior to that, it was something else. So there's always something interesting that pops up after the holidays where it's like, how do I get this to work in the office? Well, the answer is you don't. It's not where it should be, but it is what it is. We have to look at it. Finance guys are I'm sure, like most executives, they like their things and they want to use their things and work. Right now, I mean, for us, that's the AI stuff, right? And being really careful about how that touches their corporate data, and just kind of we can't stop it. It's just a matter of now just telling me, like, look, just you have to understand what you're putting yourself through and what potentially could happen. Let's at least do some review of your your data governance and all that to make sure that when you do drop in ChatGPT or Copilot or Anthropic or whatever, that it's not sucking in something that it shouldn't be. That's where we're at with that.
Yeah, and it's confusing now because now we've got on-device AI, right? And it's like, is that even in the same? Is that in the same bucket? And I don't know. We have to think about it, right? It requires critical thinking, right?
Yeah, I'm sure the Apple's MDM hooks have not been adequately tooled out that we can define what the boundaries for that are in Apple Intelligence. I'm sure that's not the case.
What else? So, I mean, when Microsoft and Google agree on anything in email, we all have to jump because they own email, right? So, like the last 18 months have been like sort of this DMARC adoption curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were threatening BIMI. We will see where that goes. I don't think that's a written course yet, but that's like the company logo on the email, right? And some other stuff.
For
That
the
one's
low price of a couple $1,000.
well, I implemented it, but I didn't pay for the cert, which means that the question is, are they going to make you pay for the certs or not, right? Because you can just be BIMI compliant on your own domain name, which already has a cert, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see if when they go to enforce mode, what they do there. But there's some other email stuff. But and then of course Apple like owns mobile. They don't own all the mobile footprints, right? But when they make a decision, right, it's uniform across the industry. We all have to sort of move. Google actually doesn't have the ability to sort of do that because they have to drag all the mobile vendors along. What else? The cloud vendors. What is new? Anything new in cloud for you guys this year that you've been like, oh, that's new?
I think for us, one of the biggest like run around your own tail thing for the year has been Microsoft sweeping changes to their security defaults across all the tenancies, where they used to make some things optional, and then it was up to us as MSPs, guide our people towards MFA and guide our people towards DMARC and DKIM and all these things. And now they just flat out slam on top of us all of these defaults, and sometimes even change without even notifying the MSP or making a proper announcement or guidance of what's being changed around the tool stack that we have deployed. Like many of us deploy the external gateways, like Barracuda's gateways or Trim Micro's gateways or whatever. Mm-hmm. And these things have a certain balance of tuning and how they work. And all of a sudden, Microsoft changes everything, and the customer's pissed, right? Because they have two quarantines all of a sudden, and they didn't ask for that, and we didn't do it. It was Microsoft's doing. I think this year has been very interesting around that space, at least for us with all customers across the board. And I think one of the biggest pain points might seem dumb and trivial, but it's been a pretty fastidious thing of how you scan to email. Scan to email has been horrendous thanks to all the changes with Microsoft security defaults. I think the Microsoft's never-ending changes, we really have to be on top of them.
It feels like a long time ago now, but I remember in the first half of 24, actually there was a big, I don't know if you guys experienced this, there was a lot of misconfigurations between Office 365 and Avanan because of the DMARC implementation. And if you weren't an Avanan buyer, right, you probably talked to someone that was an Avanan buyer, and this interaction between Avanan and Microsoft 365 was a bit of an issue. It seems like it's resolved now. I haven't seen that issue in a little while, but so that's maybe in that category. But are you feeling a little burned, or are you feeling like, oh, good, it's good we got that over with?
Well, it's definitely good that we got it over with. We already figured everything out, from all the speed bumps that we have to, jump over throughout the past few months with that. But yeah, it was an interesting part of 2024.
I think the one thing we're going to see a lot more, and we've already seen it over this last year, is this strong reliance on Entra ID. Across the entire Microsoft stack. We've seen it with Azure plan, when you talk about P1 and P2, and now it's Entra ID P1, P2. The push towards business premium, which also increases your client cost. You're going to see a lot more of that. I was happy to see that this year Microsoft released their CSP transfer process to be able to transfer annual subscriptions, because the customers really at the end of the day should be able to own their data and kind of move it around from MSP to or CSP to CSP if they want to. But what I do see happening, and I'm not sure if anybody else feels this on the call, is there's not a lot of information that Microsoft puts out when they're making these sweeping changes. And it's the community that's coming back and saying, oh, by the way, this is something you need to be aware of. And I really wish that they would be better about that. It's not, even as a partner, like, you don't know it's coming, and then all of a sudden it does come, or somebody hears about it by way of something else, and they're sharing information online. And most of the time the changes are actually for the better, right? But like, we don't have the foresight to know it's actually coming because nobody's telling us. And the only people that are talking about it is the community. And then when it actually does happen, going back to like what Riz is saying, like you're almost like running around trying to take care of it. It's like, it's not that you don't want to do it. You want to take care of it. You want to go that direction. And you're perfectly fine as an MSP saying, hey, you know what? Microsoft's forcing it. You got to do it now. For all the times that you fought me as a client about all these things you need to change, right? Like, it's Microsoft's fault. Go talk to Big Daddy Microsoft, right? But like, they don't communicate that down early enough.
Nope.
And they're not solid enough when they want to implement something to say we're actually doing it on this day at this time, right? Like, even when you talk about the security default rollout, it was like there was nobody that was telling you when each tenant was going to be moved over. They just said, oh, over the next year.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, well, I mean, great, that really helps. Like, it'd be really nice if like I had a little forecast chart or something, right? So I could like roll this out to my clients instead of like, oh, one day I just went to go log in and found out it's set up, right?
It's almost like Microsoft's not one company, but a series of fiefdoms in some kind of ecosystem.
Yeah,
we're all John Malkovich.
But they're going to keep pushing that. And like, I'm definitely not, we are a pro Microsoft shop. Like, I mean, we love a lot of the Microsoft products. We deploy AVDs. We don't do terminal servers. Like, we're very heavy in Microsoft, right? But like, there's a lot of things that I'm still like, the cart's still kind of out on, right? Like, I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, it'd be nice to be like a full Microsoft shop and run Intune, but I can't really trust with Intune that I can feel good about rolling the product to all my clients, right? Like, and so while it'd be really nice to do that, I just wish that the tech giants would somehow align with the market to realize, hey, wait, there's a lot of opportunity here in the MSP space for, I mean, I know Microsoft's going to deal with the bigger fish, right? But like, there's a lot of opportunity in the MSP space to go pro MSP and say, hey, we want our partners out there. We want you pushing this product. And if I rolled back 10 years ago, right, I feel like there was more emphasis from the tech giants, from the Microsofts of the world. They had tech evangelists that were going around and like telling everybody about the new product coming out and trying to get Azure out there, right? They were doing big blowouts for the new version of Windows. Like, they were trying to get their product name out there. Now it's kind of like they just sit there and they're like, oh, we flipped the switch. But we didn't tell you we flipped the switch. We're just going to let you guys all talk about it and figure out how to fix it.
Well, they flip the switch, but they don't update their documentation to match, right? So
oh, yeah, that's great.
You're trying to figure it out. And the documentation is all the old version. Yeah, and you have like a few people that you follow, do your best, like to have them kind of disseminate that information to you. You know, I do that. You know, I will watch what Nick Ross does on YouTube, and he usually does a pretty good job of telling us what's new and what have you. And you take the bits that are interesting. I was at an enterprise briefing that at Microsoft's office here in the city, and all this really interesting stuff that they were like they kind of distilled down from Ignite. I was the only non-enterprisey guy there in the room, and be cool to actually have somebody that do this to help tell us that this stuff was happening for sure. There's a lot in there. My biggest gripe especially with Microsoft, and I could not to turn this into a Microsoft bitch session or something like that, but they're still pushing, I think, I would say some baseline compliance and security things up the stack. I think unnecessarily so, where we're getting forced into small clients, like wealth managers that guy has 5 employees that now has to get E5 because of this one little bit, like to archive teams or something like that. And so those are things that, and you know, I'll put, not to throw somebody else on the bus under the bus too. Slack does the same thing, where you have to pay this enterprise licensing fee to get what SAML. Like, you got to be kidding me. So yeah. I think that these security taxes need to stop. But unfortunately,
well, the SAML one drives me crazy, right? Because there was a time not too long ago where that was like a clear, like, top rung feature, right? And it seems like actually that's table stakes for cloud adoption in small business these days. So, yeah, I would like to see, like, if the vendors can't figure out what else to put on that tier, maybe that tier is not actually valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matt, I'll be crazy. I'll be the crazy one on the call. I think one of the things that's coming is back a slight swing of the pendulum back away from SaaS and cloud. And I think some of our customers are going to be interested in being hybrid again, maybe not in 25. But some of the things we're talking about, Microsoft pushed into their product maybe for their own reason to be secure, so that they could say their platform was secure. And we, as their MSP, CSPs, inherited it when we had to put in whatever MFA for a specific admin panel or whatever. So that direct connective tissue to the customer has been great in many, many, many ways. But I see us, like we talked about last time, as solution orchestrators to really help customers understand what they're getting into. When they give up the freedom of setup.exe and they just visit a URL. And I think some of our customers are going to come back a little bit towards some hybrid models, cloud where it makes sense, and then a little bit of control and having their own change schedule and their own, release schedule, a little bit more control of that. And we're going to play a big role in that. That might be in 26 or 27. But I definitely see that's part of our future. I think that pendulum's coming this way a bit.
You might be right. And you may also be unaware that Alberto had an episode with us recently. We had a Starlink episode. We were sort of excited about the fact that for him, it's life-changing because they were, through necessity, right, not able to fully adopt the cloud on the island,
right,
because of the storm risk, right? And so the on-prem never went away for you.
Mm-hmm. It hasn't. No, Puerto Rico has not gone like fully cloud because we can't. And you'll have a lot of customers that just don't trust taking things to Azure because they're like, okay, but we lose power and the telcos around us start dropping like flies, and we're depending on our solar panels or our diesel generators to run. If it's not on-prem, we can access it. Then Starlink comes around, puts a service online in the island, and it really makes it work very well. I guess the turning point is as soon as SpaceX decides to give us permanent public IPs that we can latch onto, because they give you public IPs and they work for VPN and all these things. But if you turn off the dish for a certain amount of time or move the dish,
they steal it back.
Will change, and it kind of makes things a little funny. But technologies like SASE really now are resistant to things like that. So there's a lot of good things coming around that will help a territory like Puerto Rico adopt the cloud a lot more. I wanted to jump on James' bandwagon and say I love Entra ID, and everything that we can manage with Entra ID as IDP is fantastic. And even on the network access, NAC and SASE and all these things, Barracuda's product in SASE is also I'm a big fan of because they base all their authentication around that. If the customer has the pockets for it, 100%, man. Throw them into Entra ID P1, stop joining into on-prem AD, and use Azure AD for everything is fantastic. As an MSP, it makes everything a lot easier, to be honest.
So we're running out of time here, guys. We had more topics here, but I'm wondering if you guys are amenable to a quick 20-second, hi, I'm whoever, and this is my business little stump video. Do you guys want to take a turn quick?
I don't mind.
Doesn't seem like anyone really wants to do it or not do it, but
Alberto said he'd start.
Yeah. All right. So let me cue you up here, man. I'm actually going to stick you on stage alone, and I'll give you your 30 here.
All right. So what do you want me? Just an intro? Matt? Just dropped it on me. All right. Anyways.
I can't talk when I'm off the screen. Just say, hi, I'm Alberto, and this is RIZQ. Like what you guys are all about.
All right. So my name is Alberto Ramos-Izquierdo, CEO of RIZQ. We consider ourselves a next-gen MSP, MSSP based out of Puerto Rico. We specialize in everything MSP related, right? Everything from tier 1 support desk all the way to risk assessments, compliance, cyber liability, and cybersecurity monitoring and remediations. So that's what RIZQ is in a nutshell.
Hi, I'm James Markley. I'm the CEO for Virtumarc. We are a next generation MSP based out of Tampa, Florida. We have clients all over the US. We focus on delivery of cloud services, single sign-on applications, end user support, and we really integrate ourselves fully into your tech stack and your executive team to make sure that we're an extension of your business. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is having some really strong and amazing partnerships. So we're master MSP with 2 or 3 national vendors. We work really, really tightly with other MSPs that are looking to scale their business and to help deliver services to their clients. And we're looking forward to 2025 and seeing where we can go with this.
I'm Raffi Jamgotchian. I'm the founder of Triada Networks. Triada Networks helps investment companies, mostly in the alternative asset management space. That includes small hedge funds, private equity firms, private credit. We provide world-class IT and cybersecurity services that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, and gain the trust of their clients, keep regulators at bay, and help them be more competitive in the market.
Hi, my name is Rob Carselle with First Tracks Technology. We're based in Columbus, Ohio, but we service customers all over the United States. We're a managed services provider that really cares about what you care about, keeping your business secure, delivering applications for the right price, and just what's coming down the pipe in technology that your business should be considering. So we look forward to being your partner in business.
Well, that was fun, guys.
Not awkward at all.
They're going to have an outtakes video, Alberto, and it's just going to be you going, "Oh, what do I say?"
So
What's this part about?
Matt, I almost just went with James just bought us in the chat. So I'm something like that. Just to stir the pot.
all right, guys. I'm gonna call it. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Actually, I think next week we got a rerun because it's another funny week. But we'll be back in January with new episodes. Until then, join the channel, like, subscribe. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Thanks for having
Happy
me.
New Year.
Happy
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year.